This week on the Backtable Podcast.
In the medical field, you have so many specialties. And what that does is that allows a person to be great at something and not think they have to be great at everything. Being a good leader means that you are going to be great at something, at some type of leadership, but you always have to lean on other great leaders because you're not a know-it-all. And don't ever think that you ever are going to be something like that. And that's why before, like I said, a lot of times you sit back and you listen because you learn a lot that way.
And another great pleasure for me. This is Dana Dunleavy from Buffalo, New York, here with the Wayne Olan. And I like to be very, very respectful, especially to those that were great mentors to me and say Dr. Olan. But since he's known internationally as Wayne, we'll probably go by that. And Wayne, can you give us a little bit of your origin story? We both are in these fascinating multidisciplinary programs, each working with chairs of neurosurgery that are incredible across the world. But maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I think, and then as I go through it, I'll sort of lead us to how we got here today. My name is Wayne Olan, and as always, it's just such a privilege to be here. I'm humbled to be sitting here with you, Dana, and especially with you, David, and to talk about this because this has really become a passion for me. I'm the director of Minimally Invasive Neurosurgery at the George Washington University Medical Center in Washington, D.C. I am an interventional neuroradiologist by training, though, and I joined this practice 14 years ago and really began to collaborate outside of my subspecialty into another. Over the course of that 14 years, a lot of people who do what I do, and now including Dana, have become quote unquote multidisciplinary. But I grew up, a kid playing sports my whole life. And about 5 or 6 years ago, my program, our new chairman, is military. I have the real pleasure and like I said, privilege and honor to work for a guy named Michael Rosner, who not only changed the way I think about what we do, but also changed the way that we recruit into our training program. We have a really active training program and one of the most sought after programs in America. And started looking at the way we train our residents, our fellows, our students. And one of the things Mike did, and a friend of his is the gentleman sitting here, Dave Tilton. Dave will describe his history and his credentials, which are unbelievably impressive. And we are all so appreciative to him for everything he's done. But he also said something when I was listening to him once where he mentioned that this is the most stressful time in people's lives. Why not make it potentially the most enjoyable, but not only where they can get the growth professionally, but experience personal growth, because that's how we can establish our legacy, is by putting it into the people who follow us. And that's turned it into a passion for me. The culture of our program has changed the way we practice. It's changed the way we teach. It's changed the way we recruit. And the leadership we provide, I think, has changed not only my experience, but more importantly, the experience of everyone who comes after me. And that's the way that I'm going to establish legacy in my career. And then hopefully legacy, bigger than my career. And like I said, listening to David speak about it was one of the things that probably has turned this passion into something a little bit more concrete. And that's probably why we're sitting here today.
That sounds wonderful. And would this be a good time to hear a little bit about David's history?
I think it would, and just be prepared to be incredibly humbled and impressed.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. If anybody should be in awe, I should be in awe just for being in the presence of you two gentlemen. The things that I've done don't nearly come close to the things that you have done. But just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm a Southern boy, grew up in New Orleans and also just outside of New Orleans in a small place called Waveland, Mississippi, and learned a lot because I was brought up by very close-knit families. After I graduated from high school, I went off to LSU for college and lasted there a few years. And just at the time, it just didn't seem to be the right place or the right thing for me to do. So I decided to go out on my own and join the military. I joined the Navy in 1983 and spent 20 years in the Navy. Started off as a Navy photographer and then went into the dive community as a Navy diver. After that, I joined over to SEAL Team 2, SEAL Team 8, and then finally on to SEAL Team 6, where I spent quite a bit of time overseas in Afghanistan and in Iraq, also in Kuwait. But it gave me the opportunity to learn everything that I have over the years. And then after that, retired. The crazy thing is of course, once you've been in the military, it's quite hard to retire, go home, sit down and throw the line out there on the end of the pier to go fishing. It'll drive you crazy. So I decided to open up a little bitty company or a small business out of my garage and ran that for about 9 years and I got lucky, and also with the grace of God and all the veterans that had worked with me, was able to grow it into a large corporation, sold that off and decided to retire again. And of course, my wife looked at me and said, heck no. And so I went off and was introduced to Michael and Mario Andretti. And lo and behold, next thing I knew, I was owning an Indianapolis car that ran the Indy 500 with Takuma Sato, and we won the Indy 500. So that was a feather in my hat that I was absolutely honored to be a part of. We're still racing cars, and I'm at home helping my wife with our 2 children, high school and college, and still working as much as I can.
And I think that's incredible. I think, when we think about different places that Wayne and I have both been working, right, at, our connection initially started while I was at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore and he was in DC. And again, if we think about the incredible things of Wayne, it starts with an incredible passion for patient care. And really, that's been unique for him, that he's been able to be so involved with the military. And that's been a huge reward for him. But I'll let you speak about that, Wayne.
I've gotten very fortunate. And David, at some point, I'm going to pin you on your leadership within the military, because that is part of your history, which I think also brought you to us. But, I've been blessed, right? I'm in Washington, D.C., so being so close to the White House, so close to Congress, you get to do stuff probably not to do a lot to do with skill, but just based on location, because they don't want to have to vet you twice. But I've had the privilege of being involved there and then meeting people who've been involved in things like that. And then obviously very active in the head injury issues that are going on, not just in athletics, but in the military. And being able to, try and alleviate some of that, and being involved in research development, as well as hoping to, as we say, prolong people's careers as well as their availability, has become a real passion of mine. But, being in Washington has allowed me a lot of that. I don't think a lot of it is based on my expertise, but a lot of it is on relationships. Relationships really are the strings that hold everything together, I think, for a lot of us. And you choose to make some, you choose not to make some, but the ones that you make can really forge different pathways for you. And like I said, the one that I have now with David has really changed a lot, or elevated a passion of mine. And that is to, why not make this experience for those that come behind us the best it could possibly be, not just professionally, but also personally, also in their own personal development, and really focus on what we're trying to build here with respect to culture, so they can then carry that to their next generation and provide the leadership that helps them with that. Leadership that makes them look back at it and go, wow, those guys really made a difference. I've had a blessing in my life of being part of teams where, when you look back at the success, part of the success was really about the culture and the leadership, not necessarily the talent. And culture and leadership can take you a long way. And I also think it changes the entire experience for some, and especially in medicine, where I don't think a lot of that is given a lot of thought or emphasis. And maybe now it should.
I completely agree. I mean, one thing before we do go any further, I do want to give a big shout out to George Washington University Hospital and all of the people there, Dr. Rosner, yourself, and all of the doctors and the nurses, because when I was over in Afghanistan, I did break my neck and my back. A few years later, I ended up under the knife with Dr. Rosner, and I tell you what, the man saved my life. He and his whole staff there. And that just goes to show that when you learn everything that you do learn, the best thing, and you have a responsibility to give back. Don't just take all of that knowledge, all of that experience, and close it up inside. Just use it. You have to share it. You have to share it with these young doctors, these young people coming up through school, because they need your guidance. They need your leadership, because believe it or not, although they might tell their parents and everybody that they know everything, they don't. I remember that one saying that my father always told me. He looked at me and he said, "Son, the older you get, the smarter I get." Just remember that, because as I got older, I remembered, darn, he did know what he was doing, and he did know what he was saying. So yeah, the older I got, the smarter my father got. But I just wanted to give that a quick shout out.
That's fantastic, David. And when you think about that and what you just said of kind of all of our roles to give back, do you feel like that came from your family or from the early years in the military or from your racing career?
All of the above. It first came from my family, because I came from a very close-knit family. You know, one of the things that we had as I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, one of the things that we had the ability to do was we had the ability to lean on one of our parents. Usually it was your mom. Back then, the world was a little bit different than it was now, where usually only one parent needed to go to work to be able to make a living and bring home the bacon, as they said down south. And my mom was home, and she was a true saint. She was the one who really guided us children. There was myself and my brother and my sister growing up down there, and she was there for everything that we needed. And then through that leadership from her, as I moved on through school and then on into the military, once I was in the military, I took those things that I learned throughout my family and then applied those to the military. So whenever an opportunity came up, or when I got into a situation that I needed to make a decision, I could always think about, what would mom do? What would dad do? And then I applied those. And it was just a roll on and on and on throughout my whole career, taking the experience from the family, from the military, and then further on into my business. And then of course, last into racing.
That's great. And I think, you know, whether you look at someone like Dr. Olan, right, who has had various locations of his career and really excelled at every point, you know, we look at your resume going through so many promotions in different locations in the military, and then your injury, and then your successes afterwards. We oftentimes talk about what allows some people to succeed. Do you have any thoughts about what helped you?
Well, the things that helped me to succeed were the people that were around me. I never claimed to be the smartest person in the room. I woke up every morning and thought that every day that I live, I've got to learn something. So I learned it from the people around me. And then every day that when I was growing up and when I was in the military, one of the things that I did is that no matter what happened throughout the day, I always volunteered for something. Somebody would come up, and I remember my chief coming up and telling me one day, he said, "Hey man, I need a volunteer to go out." And everybody's like, "Oh God, what's going to happen?" I said, "I'll go." And next thing I knew, I was sitting on a rope about 40 feet off of the deck on the side of a ship, painting it haze gray and underway, and painted for about a week. And I learned how to paint. But people would laugh and they'd say, "See, that's what happens when you volunteer." But I learned something from that. One of the biggest things I learned was the next time the chief asked for something and wanted somebody to do something, if I volunteered, it wasn't going to be painting this side of the ship. It was going to be something different. And volunteering and just taking that extra step to do something that other people would just rather sit back and just do the same thing every single day. That doesn't help. You have to learn something new.
So Wayne, just heading back to you, you know, we've always been able to reminisce about your leadership, both on the field as an athlete, as a father, as a coach. Can you tell us a little bit about your success?
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of it, I have to tell you, is you learn. Is accidental. It's certainly not. It's one of the few things in life I will tell you that you can't learn. Almost, I don't think you can learn in a classroom. That it's by experience, it's by example, it's by having mentors that you felt got the most out of you. and you look back at it and said, why did they get me to overperform? What was it about this relationship or this situation or this environment that got the most out of me? And so I look back at a lot of that, and, you know, especially now being in the situation I'm in, because I've been in a leadership position in this department for the entire time I've been in it. I have residents, I have fellows, I have students, and why, you know, try to make their experience as positive as I can make it? Because I've had some negative ones going through my career, just like you have, Dana, and David, just like you have, when they didn't have to be that way. A lot of times, even if the subject isn't what I wanted it to be, I've found that the things I enjoyed the most were based on the passion of the preceptor, the passion of the mentor, not necessarily the subject matter. And I think Dana and I, you and I touched on this. I wanted to go into ortho coming out of med school, right? I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon. No doubt about it. It's like I wasn't good enough to play sports at the highest level, so I'm going to go into orthopedic surgery, right? And when I got into my orthopedic surgery, everybody, all they did was complain how bad it, you know, oh my gosh. And I was like, this is terrible. And I still loved the field because I'm kind of still doing it now to some degree. But so I learned the passion of the preceptor, honesty of the preceptor. Have the preceptor really, you know, there's always this statement out there, and I'm sure, David, you've heard it. Nobody cares what you say or what you do till they know that you care. And that mattered to me. When my mentor, my preceptor, I felt cared about me, or they raised their glasses to look me in the eye, not looking at me through mirrored sunglasses, that's when I realized I'll run through a wall for this guy. And that's what changed things for me. I think culture is really about that. It's about being accountable to your peers, to the people next to me, to the guys I'm back to back with, knowing they can count on me. Yeah, it's great, you know, the name on the front of the jersey. I get all that. But when it's the person standing next to you in the foxhole or on the ship, that's who you, when you're accountable to them, that's when our culture's been the best. And then I said, okay, well, how did leadership bring that out? Well, leadership to me was a lot about caring about the people that you have in your care. If they know you care about them, if they know you're going to do everything in your power to let them achieve the best version of themselves, even if that's not what society says the best version should be, then I think you're onto something. And I learned that not in a classroom, not from a textbook, by watching it several times in my life unfold in front of me. And then looking back on my own experience and saying, how did that person get that out of me?
You know, one of the things that I learned as I'd been in the military for about 12 years, I obtained the rank of chief. And in the military, if you know somebody who's been in for 20 years, they'll tell you that, some people may argue, but they'll tell you that becoming a chief is probably the biggest promotion that anybody could ever get in the military, whether you're an officer or an enlisted person. And I remember I was up in Alaska on a training exercise when I found out that I made chief. And all the other chiefs came and they grabbed me and they congratulated me. And then they said, now it's time to learn. They were going to instill their leadership qualities on me. And they said, we're getting in a van and we're going out drinking. And I said, oh my goodness, what's going to happen here? And they said, oh, but you're the dedicated driver. So you're going to be our driver and you're not going to drink. But for every drink that we drink, you have to drink a glass of water. And I said, seems to be pretty easy. I had no idea what was going on. So we went out and of course there were 6 of them and 1 of me. So I was drinking quite a bit of water. Got up from the bar and I said, I've got to run to the bathroom. And the master chief that was there said, no. No, you can't go to the bathroom right now. He says, as a matter of fact, I need to talk to you. Let's go outside. And we walk outside and it's probably about 35, 40 degrees out there. And he says, starts talking to me about life and about the military and about leadership and about what I need to do. And I'm standing there. All I could think about was, I have to go to the bathroom. And after about 45 minutes of him talking to me, he looked straight at me and he said, David, he says, this is your first lesson. He says, because you're going to sit in your office one day and it's going to be 5 o'clock in the evening and you're going to want to go home. And a young sailor's going to come in there and he's going to say, Chief, I've got a problem. And you're going to have this hot date with your wife that you've got to go home to. And he's going to go, this is a matter of life and death. I mean, I've got a problem. And as much as you want to leave, you have to stop and you have to say, wait, I'm the leader here. I owe it to these young sailors to be here, to sit down, to listen to them. And that's exactly what I mean, the lesson I learned, and then about 15 minutes later, finally, he let me go to the bathroom, and of course I took off. But that's the lesson that he taught me was, as a leader, you owe it to these kids. These kids are coming up, excuse my language, but they're dumb as a box of rocks sometimes when it comes to leadership. Now, they might be academically superior to many, many people, but when it comes to the leadership, when it comes to knowing life, they just don't know. And we are there to teach them. And that's what we have to do. We have to sit down and listen.
You taught me that, bro. Listen, make sure you hear the entire question before you answer it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Or you'll stick your foot in your mouth. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's one of those things, you know, it's so funny. You're able to share many of your experiences by stories. And I've always been able to do that quite a few times. I can remember when I was sitting in the class talking to the young surgeons to be, I guess they had become surgeons. They were in their practice, or they were getting ready to go into their practice. They were at the school, and I was talking to them, and I said, right now is literally the most important time of your life, because you have to put everything, as much as you want to go out and have fun and do whatever you want to do, you have to put everything into your school. You have to learn it, because you're not going to have that opportunity to do that later on. I remember when I was in a meeting in the morning one morning, and another, you know, one of these stories, the Master Chief comes in and he goes, I need a volunteer again. And of course, I taught myself throughout my career. By this time, I had been in the Navy probably 10 years. And he said, I need a volunteer. And it said, I need a volunteer to go to Puerto Rico. And nobody ever wanted to go to Rosie Roads, Puerto Rico. I mean, that was hell on earth. And I was just like, well, I'm a diver. There's a lot of water. I'll do it. And he goes, okay. He says, well, you're going to spend the next 2 weeks in backseat training on F-14s, because you're going to Puerto Rico to fly backseats of an F-14. And you're going to do video, and you're going to, of some strafing runs. And about 3 different senior people to me jumped up and said, whoa, no, I want to do that. I'm going to do that. And the Master Chief, at that time, I think it was the Senior Chief, turned around, looked at everybody and says, no, he volunteered. He stood up for it. He did it. I was lucky. As a matter of fact, I went there and took a photograph that I took, was won me Military Photographer of the Year. And it was when they retired the F-14, it was the picture that they used to retire the F-14. But, you know, just these stories, what I'm trying to say is that in life, you can't pass up opportunities. You can't just do things just to get by. If you do that, you're going to be that person that just gets by. And who wants to do that? Everybody wants to be successful. At least I would hope everyone wants to be successful. And it's much harder now than it was when we were kids, at least as we see, because there's all this social media and this peer pressure and everything that's upon you. You have to choose what's good, what's bad, and then walk that very narrow path to be successful. And when we were in the military, it was a hard thing to do, because, like we say, when you're in the training aspect, when you're in school to become a surgeon, when you're in the teams to go out there and become a part of one of the what was we called one of the teams that was out there, that's the time when you screw up. That's the time that if you screw up, it's the best time to screw up, because when you have when you have a patient under the knife, or when we were over in Afghanistan and the bullets are flying, that's not the time you can screw up. So you have to put all your time and effort in now. You have to pay attention now. And as a leader, we have the responsibility to make sure that we teach you. And if you do screw up, we don't, you see all these movies where everybody comes down on them. You might come down on them right there and then and yell at them and say, hey, no, get your butt back here and do it right. But later on, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to stand behind them and stand next to them, and then explain to them, this is what you did wrong, and this is what you need to do to be successful, and then lead them. So it's really on us to make sure that we do that we make sure that we teach those young kids the right way. And if they do screw up when they get out there into real life, to me, I feel like I would have failed as a leader. So it's very stressful for us. And it's also very rewarding when you win that war.
And David, with Wayne and I focusing most of our time on education and training, it's fascinating to hear, your courage to volunteer for things. Similarly, one of the things that we have a challenge for is if everyone's just trying to not get anything wrong, during their residency and fellowship, they don't gain a lot of experience. How do you think we help people so that, there's a challenging case and they jump into it and they try to learn, even though they probably will get a lot of things wrong in that?
To be honest with you, I'm not too familiar with, of course, with the type of training that you go through for surgery, but what I would probably say is to take those students and put them in as a realistic situation as you can. For us, when we were in training, when the team guys would go through their training, they would go into a facility, a building, and the walls changed. You could change the walls around. And they went into this live fire area, and they would literally go through there and go look for the bad guys to try to find the good guy. They'd have somebody who was captured, and they were keeping them in a room, and you'd have to go through and you'd have to find that person. When we went through that training, we were using live rounds. If you and the person that you were going in there trying to save, that was a real person sitting in that room. You were sitting there with a flak jacket on and all this kind of stuff, but there were live rounds flying around you. So I think to put somebody in the most realistic environment is probably one of the best ways to teach somebody exactly what you need to do. And that's what we did in the military. And there were plenty of times to be in a situation where you were in a very real environment.
One of the things I found, Dana, to sort of move forward with respect to what he's saying in our careers, and I found this a lot in my training, was asking questions wasn't necessarily always a safe place. And I've made that a focus of mine, that if you're in my lab, that's a safe place. You can ask what you want. I can't lie to you. Outside in the hallway, I could lie like crazy, right? But if I'm in my lab, where do they get? Just what Dave talked about. The residents, the fellows, the students, you know where they get? They learn watching the struggle. Then they learn struggling, but then maybe potentially having you help them out or being able to ask a question without them being an embarrassing moment. Every one of us remembers being in some one of our internships or in medical school. Guy asks you a question and just starts berating you. And you're like, that doesn't do anything. And that's why I will tell you, in the recruiting process, I love athletes in military because they're used to failing in front of people. They're used to taking that failure and turning it into a success, learning from it. What did I do wrong? Just what Dave said. Examine what went wrong. How do I improve it? They're used to failing on massive, in front of a lot of people watching. But it doesn't affect their sense of self, their sense of strength. And they're willing to move forward, keep training, keep fighting forward. So I think one of the things is people training, we have to change, especially in medicine, because you see it all the time, and I'm sure you see it. The residents get embarrassed. The medical students get embarrassed by their preceptors. That almost has to, that's no way to teach people.
Well, and I agree with you on that because, the worst thing that you can have happen to you as a student in a classroom, and it happens in high school. I hear it from my children when they come home all the time is, I said something in class today and everybody laughed at me. If you say something, there's no such thing as you've always heard in the past. There's no such thing as a stupid question, only a stupid answer.
Except if the only stupid question is the one you don't ask.
Exactly. And when I think one of the things that you have to really instill on the students in a classroom is that if somebody asks a question, even if you think it's not a smart question, if you think, God, he should know that, that's a stupid question, don't ever say that. Because you say that once, the other 9 questions is going to be a question where you sit there and go, why didn't I think of that? Wow, I learned something. And of course, another thing my father always told me, if you haven't learned something each day, you've failed. You've failed. Learn at least one thing a day, no matter how small or how big. Learn something every single day. And to go into a classroom and set out a set of rules to your students to say something like, look, help each other out. You're there together. You win as a team. You win as a group of students. but you also fail as a group of students. And if one person fails, you all fail. We always see this in the movies. We see this, everybody always says that, but we have to practice this. If one person struggles, everybody needs to get there and help that person, because the other people are going to learn, and they're going to take that back and they're going to say, you know what? One day they're going to get in that situation that's just like that other person was in, and they're going to go, boom, I know how to answer that. I know how to figure that out now because that other person went through it and I helped them. Now it's time for me to be helped. And the greatest thing in the world is stay in touch with all those people, because you can call them up on the phone and say, you remember this? Thank you very much. There's nothing wrong with that.
The other thing is we try to strive, and it comes right off of that, is that we're accountable as a group. So if one person in the group doesn't know, the whole group's accountable. So this way, the whole group gets stronger. And if you go back and, once you started to get into this, you could go back, you could read Nick Saban stuff, you could read Mike Krzyzewski's stuff, and everybody talks about what you just touched on, Dave. Learn something every day. Get better every day. Improve, even if it's just one thing. Improve one thing every day. And make sure you strive to that so there's no complacency. And that's what that does. It avoids complacency. It avoids you sitting around doing nothing. We really try to make I don't know a very safe answer to a question. It was very different when we grew up, Dana, because we didn't have this Google machine the kids have now. We had to go look it up, right? We had to go to the library if they asked us a question we didn't know. Kids now will know the answer in 30 seconds. But if you don't know, I'd rather you say to me straight up with authority, I don't know, but I'll never not know again.
One of the things that I've learned, and I've learned this just recently, is that the pressure on a lot of these students now, you say they have this tool called Google that they can go, and they've got now this AI that they can, when they Google it, they say, tell me this, and it writes a whole essay for them. I have found that this is not always the best way to solve problems, because you go onto Google and you say, what's this? And it gives you this answer, and you go into class and you got your chest sticking out and you're like, this is the answer. And somebody says, that's not the answer. You looked it up on Google, didn't you? Yeah. Well, you looked at the wrong place. This is the wrong answer. Make sure you know what you're doing when you start looking at the easy ways out. Make sure you do your checks and balances. And that's another tool for you to use, is the other students. Work together. When you have an answer, discuss it with the other ones. Don't hold back and say, well, I'm not going to tell anybody else because I'm the person with the answer. And then, no, you're, again, working as a team. In our group, 15 people that was in each one of our teams, we had 15 people we deploy together. If one person fell out of that team, it took us a while to build back up again. Not only that, but those 15 people, it was like one big family. If someone had a problem, if I had to deploy and my wife and kids were at home and the roof leaked, I guarantee anybody in my team that was there in town would be over there that minute to help them out, because they knew that I would do the same thing for them. So again, teamwork. It's the best four-letter word in the whole world.
But I love it at the level of the players. You know what I mean? It's not about the guys above dropping down. It's those guys in the foxhole. You have to be accountable to each other. And you mentioned it the other day, David, when you were talking, you said, if one of my guys ever called, I'd be out of this speech 30 seconds and on my way to the airport. And the guys 100%. Know it. And I want to make sure my residents, my fellows, my students have that same confidence in their peers, that if something happened, their peers would show up for them. That's what I mean. And I don't want them to be frightened. I don't want them to be timid about it, because the one thing that they're going to be ultimately confident about is that their peers will be there for them when they need them, because they know they would do the same for them.
Sure. And we do the same thing on the IndyCar team. On the IndyCar team, we have 8 people over the wall. They're changing the tires. They're lifting they're using the air jack to get the car up off the ground. There's somebody fueling. There's somebody with a fire extinguisher. One person misses out. It goes from a 7-second stop to a 12-second stop. That goes from first place to last place. So everybody helps everybody out. If one person has a problem and they've got an off day, they tell them, and everybody else jumps in and helps them. So that's what, that team environment's all about. And it's the same way, like you say, in class. Yeah, you might graduate with someone who's top of the class. But if that person goes up and gives a speech when they're graduating, if they don't thank the whole rest of the class for them being number one, they failed, because it's everybody in that class that's helped. That person just happened to be in the right place at the right time to get the top score.
That touches on something that you and I both know. So I mentioned this book that sits behind me, Sea Stories by Bill McRaven. And right at the first part of the book, first sentence of the book, is he talks about the privilege of serving with everybody he ever served with. That was the greatest privilege of his career. And that's what it is. And if we could make it that guys remember what it was like, that our students, our fellows, our residents remember what training was. And if it brought out that type of camaraderie and that type of accountability going forward, we could really change the experience, not just as a training program, but as a launching program to all the things that they're going to do in their life. And to be honest, Dana, David, that's where our legacy is going to come from, because they're going to carry that forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It doesn't end. The person who taught me the most when it came to racing was this old guy who a lot of people probably don't know his name, but he taught me the most. And his name was Mario Andretti. He was a quiet guy. He would sit there at the track with his tangerines, and he'd sit there and peel his tangerines and eat his tangerines all day long. And his wife would sit next to him and smoke a big fat cigar. And they were quiet. But when somebody started to do something, you'd see him quietly get up and he'd walk over and he'd say, "Hey, you might want to do this. That might help." And first of all, you were in awe because Mario Andretti just came up to you and said something. And usually what he said, 99.9% of the time, what he said, when you did it, it made a difference. And I noticed it. The leadership qualities I noticed moved its way right down to his son, Michael Andretti, who was probably one of the most successful car drivers and car owners in the history of IndyCar. And he was the same way as his father. Quiet, yet he'd come out there and he'd teach you a little here and teach you a little there. And that's why it's so important to be a strong leader, an effective leader, and to step up and be a leader, period.
Yeah, I think, Dana, in our business, you and I could teach 1,000 residents to do a procedure. But using the qualities that I've learned listening to David and listening to Mike Rosner, my chairman, talk about, that's when you teach people how to take care of people. And then going forward, how they take care of each other in their programs and how they're going to treat their future partners. But how this level will never leave them. As he said, they'll be in touch their whole careers because of the bonds that they're making now. And I think that's a change, because it wasn't that way when I was a resident. It was a lot more kind of every man for himself or person for themselves. And medicine felt like they needed to breed competition. The young eat the young kind of thing. It's not that way. That doesn't build or establish foundation. What we're trying to do here is establish foundation. And you do that by, as we said, accountability, but accountability to each other. And if they take that, they walk with it, they go forward. I think we're doing the best thing we can to set them, one foot in front of the other and send them on their way for massive successes going down and then down passing it back forward to the next group behind them.
Absolutely. Always associate yourself with success. When you find that one leader that's really good, follow them. Keep in touch with them. And by God, the biggest thing you can do to learn, dip it.
Shut your mouth and listen.
Listen. There's nothing wrong with asking questions and everything, but listen first. And listen, like you said just a little bit ago, listen to the whole question. Listen to the whole comment. Listen, take some notes, write down some questions, and then ask the questions. But by God, a lot of people just say, I don't need it. My daughter came in to me the other day and said, high school's a waste of time. I said, why? She said, because everybody just sits in there and screams and yells and everything like that. And she goes, I can't wait to get to college. And I said, well, you're not going to be successful in college unless you're successful in high school. So you'd better listen and just, filter those people out. Filter them out. Associate yourself with the successful. Associate yourself with the students who are listening, who are paying attention and doing the right thing, who are taking the notes. Associate yourself with them. And the people who aren't, you know, you can be a good person and you can try to help them a little bit, but in the long run, associate yourself with the successful people, build your team, and then just move forward with them.
Now, David, your surgeon, who we've spoken about a little bit, the chair of neurosurgery at GW, he actually trained the chair of neurosurgery at University of Buffalo, who is arguably one of the most renowned neurosurgeons now in the world. And he recently had a discussion about leadership, and I have a couple rapid fire questions for you guys about their discussion. Number one was about strong leadership, in that both you and Wayne clearly have defined yourselves as critical leaders in your space. And some have spoken that if you're too well known, many people will actually pass you by for leadership because they feel threatened by you. And I'm curious if that has happened to either of you. And David, we'll start with you, as you kind of moved, you know, from SEAL teams to all of your leadership right into car racing. Did people ecstatic about that, or were they threatened by that?
I've been lucky. And I've been lucky because I have tried as hard as I could to stay in the background. I like to teach, and I like to give credit to others. I said a little while ago, you're only as smart as the people that work for you. One of the things that I learned, and I was guilty of this as a young sailor, and that is if I was in charge even a little bit, when something good came along, I was like, I'm going to do that. And then everybody else like, why does he get all the good jobs? And I learned quickly that that does not help. And that's probably the one time when I was the leader and I made everybody know, I let everybody know that I was a leader, and that probably got me in a lot of trouble. And I learned from that. And from then on, I learned, you know what? Fair share. You can take your one, you know, fun job or something like that, but make sure that you help those people who work for you. And I always used to say at my company, nobody works for me. They don't work for me. They work with me. We work together. We're a team. I'm just the leader of the team. And that just was because I wrote the checks. But the fact of the matter is that you are right. If you get to the point where you let everybody know that you're the know-it-all, it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to have people want to keep coming to you. Now, in some situations, there's no way getting around it. In some situation, you know, you're the president of the United States. You're the face of everybody. Okay, people are you're going to have the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're going to come after you, and the people are going to like you. But for the most part, as a leader, the best leaders in the world were the leaders who gave all of the accolades to their followers, who put them up on the pedestal, who, when the commanding officer came to you and said, "Chief has a great job," you looked at him and you said, "I didn't do anything. They did." Those are the guys. Go give them the pats on the back. So I didn't really have too many issues like that. Dr. Rosner, he was a surgeon. He was a surgeon at my team down at SEAL Team 6. He was the surgeon there. And the funny thing is he was a quiet leader. And you know how I know that? Because the first time I knew that he was the surgeon at my team was when I went to go get surgery from him years after I retired, because I didn't even know he existed there. He was the quiet guy in the background that just made sure everybody was healthy. Everybody was out there getting fixed and getting back to work. So yeah, I did not. Wayne, I don't know if you ever ran into those situations.
Well, without sounding redundant, I'm going to tell you, the guy who announces himself as the leader is probably not the leader. And I noticed that, you know, if you're the guy who sets the culture, if you're the guy who shows that you care about the people who work with you, you're going to turn around and they're going to be standing there right next to you. But the guy who doesn't do that and established, like David said, he's the know-it-all. He's going to look around, his room's going to be empty. And I think that that's where it comes from. Leadership isn't about the guy who can scream the loudest, the guy who uses the dirtiest language, the guy who points fingers, the guy who calls people names. Leadership, I really believe it's about caring. It's about love. It's about setting the culture. It's about inclusion. It's about humility. It's about giving credit, taking responsibility. That's what it is. And we talked about it earlier, right? Teams make leaders look great. Leaders make teams do great. Look at some of the sports teams. Yeah, but some of the sports teams right now, they haven't changed much, but all of a sudden their culture has, because their leaders are giving it out. You talk about the Detroit Lions or Notre Dame, places where you know that the culture in that locker room greatly changed just with the change of the guy at the top. And not because he took credit, but because he gave credit. And I'm sure the players looked around and said, man, how is this guy getting me to get the most out of me? And that's where it comes from.
You're absolutely right. The biggest pat on the back that a great leader is going to get, he's going to get the biggest pat on the back at his funeral, because everybody's going to recognize what that person does and has done. And they're not going to sit there and go, oh, somebody else did that. No, it wasn't me. It was somebody else. They're not going to have the opportunity because it's going to be at their funeral. For me as a leader, my success as a leader, what I would consider my success as a leader, was probably the fact that the people that I worked with were successful. When I sold my company back in 2016, I had 4 gentlemen that were the reason why I was able to sell my company and be as successful as I was. And I rewarded those 4 people with a nice hefty check. 3 of the 4 people, one of them decided to retire. The other 3 now have very successful businesses. And that makes me feel good because I did my job. I did my job. I helped them. I answered their questions. I was there for them. I stood next to them. I stood behind them and pushed them, and I didn't get in front of them.
That's your legacy. I mean, that's what we were talking about. Those residents, those fellows, those partners of yours, guys who work for you, because they're going to take it out. They're going to take the messages and the way you taught them, the culture that you gave them, the leadership that you showed them, they're going to pass that on. And that's where, honestly, we become immortal.
I'm sure that for you guys, the biggest thing is I can imagine you have some students that graduate, and 10 years from now, all of a sudden you see something on the news of something fantastic that one of your students did. I'm sure that's got to make you feel just the best you could ever feel. I was there for that person. I helped them. They earned that because they were a great student, a great follower, and I did my job. And because of that, they're successful.
Touch on what you said, though, about Dr. Levy real quick. And he and Mike Rosner have one of these traits that I pick up on. They don't go 2 sentences in before they give credit to the people around them. That's where they become great leaders. They don't go
Absolutely.
2 sentences in, regardless of the form, regardless of the foundation, regardless of the stage they're on. Those guys are 2 sentences in, and everybody who's part of their group, team, of how they got to that spot has been given credit for their success. And that's what separates them out. And if people can't recognize that, then maybe they're in the wrong field or in the wrong level. And there are people who get credit for leadership because their team performed, regardless of them, despite them, in spite of them. But not those 2 guys.
It's true. And you know, Elad, as the chair here, just as you're saying, Wayne, is always looking at how he can provide opportunities for anyone within his department. And it's incredible how successful, you know, maybe they're all just incredibly gifted, but, you know, I think it's the fostering and the opportunities that helps as well. And he made an analogy recently about the lion's den, right? When they get into their meetings, they may be pretty honest and rough to each other, you know, about how they could improve. But out in public, they're extremely supportive of each other, and no one ever has to question, right, that they're going to go out there and someone's going to be looking for an opportunity to promote themselves over someone else. So that really is an incredible aspect of leadership.
The other is confidence, right? You kind of touched on it. They instill confidence. If they give you an opportunity and they believe in you, man, your chest gets full, you stand a little straighter. And then you have the confidence to deal with that adversity. Hey, that guy who's world-renowned, he believes in me. He thinks I can do this. You'd be surprised what you can do when people believe in you. It's in there. You know, somebody just has to dig it out sometimes. And for me, having the opportunity, the blessing, privilege of observing that and finally start to pay attention to it, I think is what's turned this into a real passion for me.
But just remember one other thing. You know, we all talk about the success. If we follow these rules and follow what our leaders and our teachers tell us, if we follow that, we're very successful. But we also have to remember that we are going to fail. At some point along the way, there's going to be failure. And the biggest part about failure is not whether you failed or not. It's how you deal with it. If you fail, I remember I was married. I've been married twice. I've got a wonderful wife. I was married once before. And I remember sleeping on a couch in my office in the military, had nowhere to go. And I thought to myself, I've failed. I've failed everybody. I've failed my family. I've failed myself. Sleeping on the couch, and I'm like, wait a minute. That's probably the lowest I've ever been in my life. And I said, there's nowhere but up. So when somebody fails, if you fail, if you do something wrong, if you make a mistake in school, accept that mistake and figure out a way to make it better. And then once you do that, share that with others so that they don't make that mistake. It's going to happen. You know, these things about people not letting their children fail or saying, oh, my child's not wrong. You know, he's never right. He's never wrong. He's always right, or she's always right. We're not God. You know, we're going to make mistakes, and we have to accept the fact that when we do, we just have to figure out a way to learn not to do it again.
Well, that's honestly where the sports comes in to some degree. And Dana, he hasn't shared this with you yet, David. He's a very high-level downhill skier. His children ski as well. He's fallen. I will guarantee you he's fallen like a ball of snow. How do you get up? And that's what it is. You're 100% right. How do you deal with that? And he's watched his kids fall. I coach sports. I played sports my whole life. You did too. I mean, if you're a baseball hit player and you bat 300, that means you failed 7 out of 10 times.
You know, one of the great things I think it's just that is fantastic about the medical field is, in the medical field, you have so many specialties. And what that does is that allows a person to be great at something and not think they have to be great at everything. Being a good leader means that you are going to be great at something, at some type of leadership, but you always have to lean on other great leaders because you're not a know-it-all. And don't ever think that you ever are going to be something like that. And that's why before, like I said, a lot of times you sit back and you listen because you'll learn a lot that way.
Well, I could listen to you guys all night, but I have a closing question, and this could be interpreted many different ways. But again, you know, one of the folks we're talking about, Eli Levy, was talking about, you know, his mentor, Nick Hopkins, who was the chair here and
God
really
rest his
actually,
soul.
Yes, thank you. You know, he was quite a pioneer, spent most of his conference times with us as interventional radiologists rather than with his peers as neurosurgeons, and really revolutionized the field with endovascular neurosurgery and doing all the incredible work that Wayne does. You know, one of the examples that he and Elad mentioned was, you know, one of the first times they had a basilar artery occlusion and treated it endovascularly when they didn't have all the devices that we have now. And a lot of their peers on the stage, on the podium, said they would love to throw tomatoes at them right now, and really were brutal. Nick Hopkins actually was removed as chair twice before being brought back. So quite incredible. And one of the things that both Nick and Elad talk about is, if you're not creating a visceral reaction, you don't have a substantial impact. And I'm curious about the two of you, you know, if you agree with that and what type of visceral reactions you've caused. I mean, I think of, you know, myself leaving Hopkins for electives to go and train under Wayne, right? I mean, I accepted the fact that if I wanted to excel in his area, I had to leave the #1 training program in the country to get that expertise. And I know he took some heat from it, but curious what you guys think of that.
I think when you talk about whether it's visceral or not, but you do create a culture, or an environment is a good word, especially in medicine, where people feel like if they're supported, they can take that leap. I was blessed as well, right? I worked for a guy named Lalagam Shaker as a young fellow who supported me endlessly. Bill Bank, who trained me in endovascular neurosurgery also. I was blessed, but with people who gave me the support, I don't want to say to make mistakes, but trial, error, find out how do you find out what works? You find out what works when you see what doesn't work. And that patient that was on the table with the basilar occlusion, Dana, that patient's dead if they did nothing. But they were willing to take the responsibility to try and save that person. And that's what I mean, that responsibility to save the person. One of my first interventional cases ever, as a fellow, my first Christmas Eve on call, was a basilar occlusion on a 35-year-old. Think about how old I am, and that guy's still alive with children. Nobody knew. We used urokinase in his head, a medicine that doesn't exist anymore. So I'm just telling you, those guys, leadership is about giving people the courage to be the best they can be. And that's what Dr. Levy does. That's what Mike does. That's what Shaker did for me. I'm sure that's what Dave's mentors did for him, do for him. Still, seeing them gives you that feeling. And I want to give anybody who trains under me that feeling going forward as well, as long as they earned it.
You know, my mentor was a little different. My mentor was very hard on me. My mentor was my father. My father was very, very hard on me. I mean, I can remember dropping a camshaft on the ground, working on an engine. My father was an MIT astronautical engineer. He graduated from MIT with his master's degree. He designed the backpack the guys wore on the moon. He wrote a book on it and everything. So he was a perfectionist. And I dropped the camshaft on the ground when we were rebuilding an engine. And he chased me around the backyard with a wrench, threatening to kill me. He wasn't going to, but he was just, it was like, because he was a perfection. You know, that's just, but yeah, exactly. I'll never forget the day that I told my father I was quitting college and going into the military. And my father, the look on his face was like, what are you doing? I left, I went through the military, and about halfway through my career in the military, my father came back to me and he said, David, he said, I had to make sure that you were doing the right thing. And that's the reason why I gave you that reaction. But he said, I was the proudest father in the world seeing what you've done with your career. And I said, Dad, the only reason why I am where I am is because of you. And of course, you know, patting each other on the back and everything, but still, as a mentor, the only other mentor that I have is that does just as well as him is God. You know, whenever you're in the worst place in your life, you turn to him and he'll always listen, and somehow he'll always give you the right thing to do. But you got to remember that mentor. Remember your mentors, no matter who they are, and always go back and talk to them, because it's good to be thanked, but it's not so much the being thanked as it is knowing that you did a good job for them.
Well, that was beautiful. I have nothing more to say.
Well, there we've achieved something then today. I got to tell you, gentlemen, it's such a privilege to talk to you guys and be passionate about this, because I do believe that this is something that we can carry forward and really change the experience for some people going forward, but also, you know, give people, like we say, that confidence, that belief that they can do great things.
Never stop teaching and never stop learning.
And one of the reasons I think this is such a critical time right now to have this conversation is every meeting I go to, there's a session on burnout. And I think that many times people don't find their careers rewarding and they don't find their peers enjoyable to work with. So just listening to the environments and the culture that you guys create, I think really should help a lot of people.
You do it as well, brother. Don't shortchange what you got going on up there. I know it's cold, but you do it just as well.
And believe me, the Bills are going to make it there one day.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a lovely evening.
Yeah, it was such a privilege, guys. Dave will talk soon, and Dana will talk soon, and I look forward to seeing you both.
I very appreciate you guys having me on.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to follow, rate the show 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at @_Backtable MSK on Instagram, X, or LinkedIn. Backtable MSK is hosted by Jacob Fleming,
Michael Barraza,
and Chris Beck.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon.
with support from
Aaron Bowles, Josh McWhirter,
and Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and show notes written by Marvi Espiritu
and Ann Dang.
Administrative support provided by Judy Dela Cruz.
Thanks again, and see you next time.